do this. Okay, so here is your super mini last ever final exam review, because there are no final exams next year. Make sure you understand that differentiation leads to division of labor in multicellular organisms like yourself. Look over some kind of chart on the three kinds of muscle tissue: cardiac muscle versus skeletal versus smooth muscle in terms of striations, how many nuclei, and voluntary or involuntary. Recall that cardiac muscle also is similar to skeletal muscle but more branched and has something called intercalated discs, which connect the cells to each other. Make sure you know your hierarchy of organization, molecule, cells, tissues, etc. There are a number of tissue questions. Please look over your different types of epithelial tissues: simple squamous, simple cuboidal, simple columnar, pseudostratified columnar, transitional, and stratified squamous. And definitely look over your different types of connective tissue and some of the different characteristics of them. Know the difference between a tract and a ganglia in reference to the nervous system. A tract is white matter in the central nervous system. The ganglia is gray matter, or concentrations of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. The difference between a leukocyte and erythrocyte: white blood cell, red blood cell. Am I right? Anatomic: white blood cell, left blood cell. Okay. In epithelial cells, remember, goblet cells are the ones that produce mucus and secrete that into the lumen. You should recall a sarcomere is a functional unit of muscle contraction. The difference between axial and appendicular skeleton is important. Appendicular skeleton is the appendages, including the girdle, like the shoulder and the pelvis. Axial skeleton is merely what's along the axis here, including your skull, your sternum, your ribs, and your vertebra. Periosteum was a covering, a connective tissue glove-like covering to bones. Microscopic anatomy of bone: remember, a hole in the bone is lacuna, and the osteocytes, don't go anywhere, I'm not done yet, the osteocytes live in the lacuna. Remember, when we did joints, a bursa is like a pillow which cushions where a joint might have some friction happening or occurring. The parts of your doggy or long bone, right? Diaphysis is the shaft. The ends are called epiphyses. In between is that epiphyseal plate where long bone growth occurs. That starts out as cartilage and then ossifies and turns to bone. You should look over the different types of joint movements. What do we have? This will be cool on video: abduction, adduction, flexion and extension. What else? Circumduction. You should look those over. Isn't there a video on Moodle or something about that? What else? The difference between a ligament and a tendon: a bone-to-bone connection is a ligament. A bone-to-muscle connection is a tendon. Went over that enough times. Anything though with the word costal in it has to do with the ribs. Look over the human muscle diagram. Remember that spelling test that we took? You should know some of the major muscles and their major movements. We also, in that little section, muscles that are antagonistic, like the biceps and the triceps, work in opposite directions. Muscles that are synergistic, like your quadriceps, sorry, can't get it up there, are synergists. They work together to perform the same action. Remember the parts of the, remember the parts of the neuron diagram. Mr. Eichler's nice little drawing on the board. Axon is output, dendrite is input, cell body. Remember the nodes of Ranvier: saltatory conduction, white matter versus gray matter, the different connective tissue coverings of muscle, epimysium around the whole muscle, perimysium around the fascicle, and endomysium around a individual muscle fiber. Three main parts of your brain: brainstem, cerebellum, cerebrum. Remember, the medulla in the brainstem controls survival functions like breathing and heart rate. The cerebellum controls muscular, smooth, coordinated muscular movement, unlike what is occurring with my mouth. Gyri and sulci. Gyri are the raised areas in the brain. The sulci are the depressed areas in the brain. We didn't spend a lot of time on it, but different kinds of nerve receptors. A thermoreceptor would register temperature. A nociceptor registers pain. Make sure you know your branching tree of the nervous system, the different branches of the peripheral nervous system, on down to sympathetic, fight or flight, and parasympathetic, resting and digesting. Remember, the retina is where your photoreceptor cells are in the eye, which process the information and help you achieve vision. The conjunctiva is a lining on the outside, a thin membranous lining that has some protective properties and can get infected. The sclera is the whites of your eyes. The difference between rods and cones. Rods were your night vision, black and white, not super clear. Cones need color and need a lot of light, but they see in fine detail. Remember, the optic disc is the area in the back of the eye where the optic nerve exits or enters, and therefore there are no rods or cones there, and it's kind of a blind spot. The disease is cataracts and glaucoma. Cataracts is a faulty lens. Glaucoma is a buildup of pressure in the aqueous humor. Remember, in the ear, the semicircular canals detect balance, whereas the cochlea, don't go anywhere, and the cochlea is for hearing. The organ of Corti is in there. Remember your malleus incus stapes, the 3 ear bones in order, external to internal. There might be a couple questions on enzymes. You got that. Remember that some of the chemicals of the digestive systems that contribute to chemical digestion: amylase in the saliva for carbohydrates, pepsin in the stomach for proteins, many different enzymes including bile from the gallbladder via the liver, and trypsin, one of the chemicals, enzymes from the pancreas that connect to the small intestine to aid in chemical digestion. Remember that a mesentery is a connection between the visceral and the parietal peritoneums. And some of the endocrine functions we'll go over more specifically. The pituitary gland is the master gland. The adrenal gland, adrenal, is next to the kidney, which controls the release of steroids, which help to an inflammatory or stress response. I keep doing that. Can you tell that that's an error? There are 12 cranial nerves present. You should know some of your directional terminology. Difference between proximal versus distal, superior versus inferior, anterior versus posterior, superficial versus deep. For energy, aerobic versus anaerobic, and even faster than anaerobic. Remember, anaerobic was faster, but you wear down and you start to build up lactic acid. Even faster than anaerobic is a kind of respiration or a means to get ATP via CP, creatine phosphate, would be an extremely quick way to obtain ATP. There will be a diagram of the skeleton. You don't have to know the individual bone markings, but you should know your bones. And there is some questions on the musculature of the cat. You should look over a diagram or two on that. Ha!